Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be able to participate in the budget debate, Mr. Speaker. Before I get into the text of my remarks for this morning, I do want to again thank the people of Swift Current for the chance that I have even to vote on the budget for the province of Saskatchewan. I want to thank them for their support in the last election. I want to touch a little bit on the last election, but I want to thank them for that support and for their ongoing advice and input to me as their MLA. And in my other capacities, Mr. Speaker, I also want to acknowledge, as I try to do every time, the support of Tammy, my wife, and our kids. Mr. Speaker, I can say that pretty safely, I think, on behalf of every member in the House, certainly every member on this side of the House, that just the chance to participate in this debate, a real and genuine debate about some of the specific measures in the budget, that it's not a bad thing at all, Mr. Speaker, but the chance to participate in it, to voice the concerns of constituents and people across the province, to work at least to try to give voice to those concerns, and then a chance to vote on the budget is something that's not lost on any of us, and it's a great honor, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting, I think, that the fact that this budget comes obviously relatively close on the heels of a general election in the province of Saskatchewan. Some would argue that even though later this day we'll vote on the Deputy Premier's budget, the budget that he's tabled, some would say that vote happened on the 7th of November 2011, Mr. Speaker. And I want to touch on that a little bit, because much of that election campaign became a debate about the fiscal plan that each party was proposing for the future of the province of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, I think that the ballot question very much became, on 7 November 2011, a question of the fiscal health of the province of Saskatchewan. How best do we keep this province moving forward in leadership in the country? How best do we ensure that that plan to move the province forward is based on fiscal responsibility, based on fiscal probity? Mr. Speaker, I remember that election very well. I know all members in the House will. And I remember the specifics around that particular ballot question. I remember the debate that we were having right up until the 7th of November, when people made their choice. Mr. Speaker, in that election campaign, the New Democratic Party proposed a platform of $5.5 billion. Wow. Wow. That was a choice they made. They had a number of different measures that they had in their budget. They really had promises for everyone. And they had spending commitments for all areas of government, and a $5.5 billion budget that, even with their plan to jack up taxes in the potash industry, which of course would have hurt the very expansions the Minister of Finance was referencing earlier in question period, even with their plan to do that and risk the economic development of the province, we would have had they been elected, massive deficits. We would be looking at a deficit budget today, and we would be voting on that had the New Democrats been successful in the election and had the chance to implement what they call their fiscal plan with its $5.5 billion worth of promises that they were making with someone else's money. Wow. Mr. Speaker, it's very important to note that this is a germane question that we're dealing with in the legislature, the NDP's alternative to our budget. I'm going to focus on our budget a lot, but this is a debate about two visions and an alternative. Because if the New Democratic Party were concerned about deficits, and the finance critic stands in his place day after day, even after his colleagues ask for the reinstatement of every reduction the government's made and ask for more spending and more, ironically enough, the finance critic often closes question period by standing up and speaking out against deficit budgets and speaking in favor of the importance of balanced budgets, mercifully free from any sense of irony, apparently. And so, Mr. Speaker, it goes to credibility, because I guess the honourable member, the finance critic, could morph into a fiscal conservative, into a fiscal disciplinarian. He could do that with great deal more credibility than he can today, because all of the promises that were made by the New Democratic Party in the last campaign, $5.5 billion worth of promises, are still on their website.
Still there.
This is, the leader has gone, the leader's gone, but the entire platform is still on the website. This is the policy of the Democratic Party. And members opposite should take the opportunity for circumspection. When they're talking about deficits or surpluses or balanced budgets, when they weigh into this debate, especially considering the fact that they still stand for a $5.5 billion platform that has a lot of promises for a lot of people, but that would result and return this province into an historic deficit situation, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, on their website, there's the game changer calculator you can actually find, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members in this House on both sides will know when they announced this game changer in the campaign, they said, come to our website and enter all of the spending promises we've made and find out how much you save. And for the few souls that did that, they found out that not only does the NDP platform work, but the game-changing calculator didn't work either, Mr. Speaker. In fact, some would point out that the only number that kept coming up on the game-changing calculator was something like 49-9, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, as that party gets closer to choosing a new leader, maybe even the finance critic himself, I would say this, Mr. Speaker, by the way, based on question period earlier today, if the finance critic is planning on running for the leadership, he ought to stop letting his seatmate, the member from Saskatoon Massey Place, write his questions. Because I think he set him up in question period in his questions to the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, though the election was about choices, that choice between a $5.5 billion platform, promises for everything from the members opposite, versus the platform we ran on, the platform that was eventually successful on the election on the 7th of November. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that we basically ran out of promises to make the Saskatchewan people with their own money by the end of the first week in the campaign, because we took a different approach. We decided that there's too much uncertainty in the world today. There's too much going for Saskatchewan in that uncertain world today, based on fiscally responsible plan. Too much of that going to risk all of that with promises, with the taxpayers' money that were not sustainable. And so we campaigned on a much different platform, Mr. Speaker. We campaigned on promises that will help people with affordability. We campaigned on promises that will keep this province moving forward economically. We campaigned on promises that treat everybody in this province equally, whether they're in the north or the south or rural or urban, Mr. Speaker, and we campaigned again on commitments that we knew to be affordable. And, Mr. Speaker, it ought to surprise no one that we have kept that promise in this budget. That when the Minister of Finance rose in his place last week and delivered the province's budget, he was able to list promise after promise after promise after promise that's already kept, months after the last election. And when it was all said and done, he was able to say to this Assembly, to the people of the province of Saskatchewan, notwithstanding some difficult choices we made in the interests of sustainability, in the interests of fiscal probity, and notwithstanding those choices, he was able to say, Mr. Speaker, unlike any of his colleagues anywhere in the Dominion of Canada, that this budget is balanced, now and through the entire year. There are some difficult choices to make along the way to that balanced budget, and we've touched on them in this Assembly. We've had a debate about them. They've been raised in question period. They've been raised in social media effectively by both sides. Those issues range from the issue we talked about today. It took the NDP till the end of the second week of the budget debate really to get in a meaningful way to the drug plan issue for seniors, but they raised it today. And you heard the Minister of Health say we took a difficult decision to increase the deductible for a drug plan that we support, that we want to see last forever. Mr. Speaker, we took the occasion to increase that deductible that hadn't been increased since 2007 in the interest of supporting seniors and children eligible for that drug plan in the long term, so that we could avoid a situation that other provinces are facing today when some third-party report comes in and says, these programs are unsustainable, never mind an adjustment, you've got to cut those programs, Mr. Speaker. That is the forward-looking part of some of these difficult decisions. And, Mr. Speaker, we presented them also in context, these changes to the seniors' drug plan. We presented them alongside our promise, our commitment that we made in the campaign, kept in this budget, to triple the seniors' low-income assistance plan in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. In the first term of our government, we doubled not only the benefit for that plan, the budget for that assistance plan for low-income seniors, but we also doubled the number of seniors who are eligible for the program in the first place. And now we're going to triple it. And now we're going to provide extra support for those who need personal care home. And now we'll build long-term care beds in this province, the likes of which hasn't been seen in a generation presided over mostly by members opposite. And in context, Mr. Speaker, there can be no doubt, notwithstanding the sustainability changes that we've made in the drug plan, there can be no doubt that there is more support today for seniors in our province, more respect manifest in the policies of the government. There's never been more respect, Mr. Speaker, than there is today, presented by this government after 4 years and now heading into our second term. Mr. Speaker, there's been some controversy as well around the issue of REDAs, Regional Economic Development Areas of the province. Their name changed to enterprise regions when we created Enterprise Saskatchewan, but these regions were created by the New Democratic Party. I know I was on the board of these REDAs, and Mr. Speaker, there's good local economic development work that happens on these REDAs. But Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, they are about regional and local economic development. And were the situation the same as it was under the NDP in terms of revenue sharing? In other words, were the issues around revenue sharing completely ignored in Saskatchewan today as they were under the NDP versus the near doubling that most municipalities have received in revenue sharing from this government? I guess people could credibly say, well, you ought to continue to support that local economic development function, those budgets, and not leave it to localities and regions. The bottom line, though, Mr. Speaker, is we don't agree. We think with the historic revenue sharing that exists in the province today, there is a real opportunity for us to turn over to localities and regions that function they've performed. If they wish to continue with REDAs, they can fund them. By the way, Mr. Speaker, there are countless communities of all sizes who have different ways of funding economic development. They've been doing it on their own, even with the REDA program in place. My home community is one example where the City of Swift Current, the ratepayers there, have always funded their Director of Economic Development. The one they have now is better than the one they had prior to 1999, Mr. Speaker. We were in Estevan last night with the caucus chair on our side of the House, and there the Chamber of Commerce is contracted by the community to deliver economic development and to deliver tourism development services. Here again, you have communities that have been providing that investment, doing that important local economic development work, even with the REDA program in place. We just think it's time, as we look for savings, as we look to balance the budget, that we move out of that area for all the province so it's treated equally, and that these things are delivered at a local level and a regional level. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, we want to do that so we can focus our own economic development strategy, our plans, on things that the provincial government should focus on. For example, like infrastructure improvements across this province. We're going to be hearing much more about that in the years ahead. Like, for example, the innovation agenda of this province that looks beyond this generation and even the next in terms of building on a resource economy and building on our strengths in that resource economy in terms of innovation in sustainable energy, in nuclear science, Mr. Speaker, and in agricultural science as well. That's a role for the provincial government in terms of economic development. Mr. Speaker, we think the role of a provincial government is to, in terms of economic development, is also to engage with the other partners across the country and the rest of the world to tell I think, the most amazing economic and fiscal story, frankly, around the world, so we can continue to attract investment to the province of Saskatchewan. And Mr. Speaker, with the help of our officials, with the help of our ministers, I can say, I believe this to be very true, Mr. Speaker, that I don't think there's been a government in recent history in the province that has made more progress in telling our story, in getting Saskatchewan's story known around the world than our government. We think we ought to focus on that and let localities focus on local economic development. So we made that decision. Mr. Speaker, we also know there have been challenges around the film tax credit, the tax grant that exists in our province and right across the country and in over 40 states in the United States. Mr. Speaker, I'll deal with it quickly if I can. There's been a lot of very good debate about the issue in the province. This is an industry that attracts and trains very creative people who do make Saskatchewan better. And this is an industry that in our province and across our country comes at a cost that's higher than almost any other industry in terms of the tax system. The tax system in place today that we have, that we've supported, that was put in place in the late 90s, is a tax system that says to a company, if you come in and set up a shell production company, and many of the applications are precisely this, set up a shell company, a temporary company, to do the production only, you can earn grant. You'll earn the tax credits, a grant up front, regardless of how much tax you pay in the province, regardless of where you're domiciled. Just based on that production's cost, here's the rate of subsidy. Mr. Speaker, we have seen that tax credit not work very well in this province of late. Not because we didn't have it, we did, but because other jurisdictions were enriching their tax credits. They were enriching these tax grants. They're doing so right across North America. It is a bidding war today. People in the film industry, we heard the minister comment, are noting as taxpayers that that there's a bidding war happening. And so it presents a choice. And you do the evaluation. You see how much activity comes from the tax credit, how much of the spin-off activity comes from that, and you consider the cost, and you consider the future as well in terms of that cost, where the industry itself has told us, by the way, you got not to just reinstate it, but in the report that was done, if you're going to keep up with everyone else in the bidding war, it's another $3.5 million with the taxpayer's subsidy to go to the industry. That's right. And so we have to make a difficult choice and be the first one in the country to say, when it comes to that bidding war, we're not going to be in the bidding war anymore. That's right. We're happy to change the tax credit to a non-refundable tax credit that effectively reduces taxes paid in the province, right, not just on productions, but from companies. Right. We saw in that same report that the minister's referenced, that the critic has referenced, that there was a desire on the part of the industry to see it grow in the province more substantively, to see a focus on all of our policy on Saskatchewan companies. Well, a refundable tax credit can do that, because it says to companies domiciled here, with roots here in the province, paying tax in the province, that you are going to get preferential treatment because we want your companies to grow here in Saskatchewan and for you to employ people in the industry. We've also said to them, the soundstage is yours if you like it, along with what would be our operating loss for a couple of years to capitalize that venture. Mr. Speaker, that is a reasonable approach from a government that says we're out of the bidding war, but we'll look at other ways, creative ways perhaps, to sustain the industry. I've heard the arguments of, well, but there's all these spin-offs. Mr. Speaker, if we applied the logic that we've heard from members opposite and others, and it's an important debate, I happen to disagree with the position, and I'll say so now. If we applied the same logic that these tax grants are good because of the spin-offs that occur, we'd have them in every other industry. Right. Everyone. Everyone. There would be an infinite amount of benefit. And people say, well, they're cost neutral. If they're cost neutral and they create a 6-to-1 benefit in the economy, why aren't they applied to every other sector? That's right. People have said, well, there's incentives in the potash industry. Well, there may be if they do certain things like they expand in the province, but there's still a net tax paid to the people of this province for their resource. And and by the way, it's sunsetted. That tax incentive ends by definition. And when it ends, they pay the highest royalties in the world, and billions of dollars have been invested, and thousands created. And the subsidy or the tax incentive, a real credit, not a grant, ends. I asked the industry when we met with them with the minister, when could we stop this tax credit, this grant then? When is the industry going to be at the point where it doesn't need it anymore? Because that's the difference between this and other tax measures. Never, they said, as long as someone else is in the bidding war. Mr. Speaker, the logic of, well, you should do it because it's cost neutral and there's spin-offs, it doesn't hold, Mr. Speaker. It simply doesn't hold. We've seen the numbers, and it doesn't hold. Otherwise, we'd apply it to every other single industry, from restaurants to the service sector to financial services to agriculture to manufacturing, to everything. Mr. Speaker, that argument we just fundamentally disagree with, and so we've made a difficult decision, and we're certainly willing to work with the industry. Mr. Speaker, on this particular issue, and I want to talk about some of the specifics in the budget. The critic yesterday asked the question. She said to us on this side of the House, she was referencing some comments by Paul Bronfman Jr., who is a billionaire in Toronto and has companies involved in the movie industry. Her question was, what message does this decision to kill the tax credit send to people like Mr. Bronfman? Well, Mr. Speaker, with great respect, I think there are some important messages in this budget for people, for certain people, and I'd like to share some of them with the members of the House today in the province. If you are in Saskatchewan and you are tired of seeing loved ones languish on a waiting list in the birthplace of Medicare, a waiting list that stretched beyond 18 months, that used to stretch beyond 18 months, if you're tired of those waiting lists, and if you support this government's surgical initiative that comes with a cost in this budget, if you are interested in a 90% reduction in people waiting longer than 18 months for surgery, or a 79% reduction in people waiting longer than a year for surgery, or a 40% reduction in the people waiting 6 months for surgery, if you'd like to see that in this province, then our message is this budget is for you. If you have loved ones who suffer with diabetes and you'd like to see more help for them in a province that's prosperous and in a province that's growing, if you'd like to see $2.5 million worth of increase in funding to reduce costs for those with diabetes, by adding 2 forms of long-acting insulin to the drug plan and expanding the children's insulin pump program from age 17 to age 25, we have a message. This budget is for you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you'd like to see more proactive health care, like screening for certain cancers, like colorectal cancer, expanded to be province-wide, so that we can deal with this disease before it's too late and before, frankly, it's too expensive. You're going to look at $4 million to expand colorectal cancer screening that is in this budget of new funding, and the message of that quite simply is, this budget is for you, Mr. Speaker. If you want to see more funding for the Cancer Agency because of the good work they do, if you want to see the government finally turn around the lack of long-term care funding in this province that prevailed for 16 years under the NDP, and see 13 homes continue, and see more investment in personal care homes, then our message is, this budget's for you, Mr. Speaker. You're in North Battleford and you want to see less talk about the Saskatchewan Hospital and more action on that 100-year-old hospital, the message is, this budget's for you. If you're in Moose Jaw and you want to see less talk about that hospital, the message is, this budget is for you. There's action on that hospital. Mr. Speaker, if you recognize, maybe you've come new to the province and you have a young family and you recognize this is a great place, but boy, we need more child care spaces in Saskatchewan. There's 500 new spaces in this budget on our way to keep our promise for 2,000, and the message from the finance minister and from the MLAs on this side of the House is pretty simple. If you want that, our message is, this budget is for you. Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, if you'd like to see some new schools built in a province that's growing, first time in a very, very long time where the clamour has been not just for some block funding to fix schools, by the way, which didn't happen under members opposite, but took ministers on this side of the House to get done, over and above that block funding now, we're building new schools in the province of Saskatchewan. And we know there's catch-up to do and a lot more work to be done. And in this budget, if you add them all up, the ones that are approved and will start construction and more new approvals, I think we're up over 20 brand new schools. If you add all of those things up in the province, the Minister of Finance is trying to do the calculation. I'm sure he'll send me a note, but I believe that's the case. So our message to parents and to school boards who want some new schools in the province because classrooms are full with a growing population, this budget is for you too. Right on. Here, here. If you want to see sustainable, affordable but important increases in advanced education, into the health regions, into school boards, if you want us to continue to invest in innovation in the province, to grow that next economy, again, the message is this budget's for you. If you're a billionaire businessman from Toronto or any other place, though, and you're looking for a grant before you make an investment, this budget is not for you, Mr. Speaker. If you want to work with government to find a better way to sustain any industry, including the film industry, though, we are prepared to work. We are ready to work with that industry to see what can be achieved together. Mr. Speaker, it was interesting the morning after the budget, and I'll conclude with this. The morning after the budget, I was watching one of the morning shows on local channels. And I noticed that the official opposition leader was on TV, and he was commenting on the budget, and he was critical of certain things, and that's what debate's all about. He was critical of the film tax credit decision that the government made. Fair enough. The reporter asked him, though, she said, okay, so if there's more money needed for filmmakers, where would the money come from? What did he say? What would he say? Well, this is a quote, Mr. Speaker. Well, practically, there are a number of areas where they could have left money for films. And one of the things they could have done is look at some of the initiatives around agriculture and look at some of the things they've done for municipalities.
What does that mean, I wonder?
Which things? Which things, Mr. Speaker? Which things that this government has done in agriculture or for municipalities? There's got a bit of a walk on that quote that the leader of the opposition's had. A potentially very divisive quote. Mr. Speaker, it bears repeating. Where would you find the money to give to the filmmakers? One of the things they could have done, he said, and I'm quoting, is look at some of the initiatives around agriculture and look at some of the things they've done for municipalities. Wow. Wow. How many years of downloading did municipalities face in this province under the NDP? 16 years. Mr. Speaker, they did not act on the request for municipalities for revenue sharing. One of the most fundamental tasks, I think, of a provincial government is to understand that the front line of economic development, that the front line of growth, that order of government that's closest to the people are rural municipalities and urban municipalities. Right. And when the province can afford it, when the province is gaining in revenue, and it was under their watch, I think when they walked away there was $700 million finally cash, by the way, not just an accounting entry. I think there was actual cash in that rainy day fund of the NDP. So they had money. What was happening for revenue sharing to municipalities so they could keep up with housing demands, so they could service more lots, so they could provide better public safety, so they could provide better water and sewer services in a growing province, so that they could ease the pressure on education tax in the rural municipalities. What was happening from that NDP government on that fundamental test of good provincial government? Nothing, Mr. Speaker. There were cuts, Mr. Speaker. That's what there were. And now, when asked, well, where would you get the money then? If you don't like this cut, you don't like that change, where would it come from? We'll take it from the municipalities in the province of Saskatchewan, say the NDP. No, they will not, because I know how the vote's going to turn out today, Mr. Speaker, and it certainly won't be on the side of the New Democrats. It'll be on the side of rural Saskatchewan, of farmers, and of municipalities in this province who ought not to be treated with that disrespect that they've received over the last 8 years. Mr. Speaker, we've seen that movie before. This province lived through that movie before, and I've had people reference the fact that the province is growing now and ask the rhetorical question, well, why didn't that happen before? Well, we've been the first to say, look, it's not the government, it's not our government that takes credit for economic growth. But, Mr. Speaker, we've long believed, and it's been the raison d'etre perhaps for this party, that government can get in the way of the potential of this great province and its people. That government, if it's short-sighted, if it chooses to be divisive and not realize the potential of agriculture, the potential of rural Saskatchewan, the importance of municipalities, if we have a government here that divides us, that cleaves us, north and south, rural and urban, that is a barrier to growth and a barrier to this province reaching its full potential. We understand that on this side of the House, and after the 7th of November, you'd think that lesson would have been heard by members opposite, but it hasn't, Mr. Speaker. It hasn't. Well, the good news is this. The good news is this. That approach to dividing this province, that approach to, frankly, putting barriers in the way of this province reaching its full potential is restricted to 9 members on that side of the House. The nimble 9. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we will take the tough decisions that we need to take to make sure that we can make a very special claim across this country and around the world. Mr. Speaker, we will take the message from this budget vote today to the rest of this country and to the rest of the world when we're traveling and promoting the province, that there is one jurisdiction. There is one jurisdiction in Canada. There's one of very, very few jurisdictions that we know of anywhere in the world that have said, in the season of deficits and spiraling debt, there's one province, one place that says, no, here we're going to balance the budget. Today and tomorrow and the day after that, we're going to balance the budget because we know at the heart of the plan to keep this province moving must be fiscal responsibility, must be fiscal probity. If we want to ensure we have sustainable programs for seniors in the future, it means we need to be fiscally responsible today. If we want to have an infrastructure program for our municipal partners in the future, it means we must be fiscally responsible today. If we want to continue to reduce taxes as we have over the last 4 years in the future, we've got to have fiscal responsibility today. If we want to continue to pay down the debt, 44% lower and counting, we've got to be in the future, we've got to be fiscally responsible today, Mr. Speaker. That is the resolve of the women and men on this side of the House. It's not subject to change. It's not negotiable. We'll take the decisions we have to take to preserve the Saskatchewan advantage and move this province forward. I'm opposed to the amendment, but I'm in favor of the Minister of Finance's budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.